When it came to karmic payback, magistrates in hell had an array of penalties at their disposal. They might issue an arrest warrant to have the living dragged before their tribunal, thereby shortening that person's allotted lifespan. They could sentence any souls to a dire rebirth, demoting them from humanity to carry on as a lower life form. And in between that death and rebirth, the magistrates inevitably resorted to their most famous penalty option: torture. Tortures in Chinese hell might be divided between environmental torments, such as knife hills and ice ponds, or they might be administered torments, such as demons grinding up the damned with a millstone or pulverizing them under a rice huller. Some of these tortures were clearly intended as contrapasso, or measure for measure, in which the punishment fit the crime. In hell, hunters were now hunted. Cheating merchants were now getting trussed up, weighed, and left hanging. And neighborhood chatterboxes were now getting their gossipy tongues plowed. Yet other tortures were more generic. In the hell scrolls and texts, the demons similarly disemboweled treasonous plotters and sibling poisoners and concoctors of fake medicine. But all those tortures were not equally weighted in the public imagination. The magistrates had their favorites, and some of those favorites were quite old, dating back to Sanskrit texts translated in the 4th century. The wardens of hell, they ask him, "Good man, what do you want?" He says, "I am hungry, venerable sirs." Then the wardens of hell prise open his mouth with red-hot iron tongs, burning, blazing, and glowing, and they throw into his mouth a red-hot metal ball, burning, blazing, and glowing. It burns his lips, it burns his mouth, it burns his throat, it burns his stomach, and it passes out below, carrying with it his intestines and mesentery. Other early tortures already existed in popular 5th century folklore, such as in a story about a young monk named Jirda who went to hell. He saw a dozen or so iron cauldrons in which sinners were being boiled, bobbing up and down. Beside the cauldrons were demons with pitchforks poking at them. One sinner was pulled out of a cauldron. Both eyes hung from their sockets. His tongue protruded a foot from his mouth. All his flesh had been burned away, but he still was not dead. All but one of the cauldrons were full. The demons said to Jirda, "Monk, you must enter this one." Almost every textual and pictorial account of hell includes the iron cauldrons, and just as ubiquitous is the vertical saw in which the damned is split in two. The famous 18th century folklorist Pu Songling described such a torture from the recipient's perspective. At this, the king ordered him to be sawn forthwith. He was sandwiched between 2 planks and fastened to the post. The minute the saw was put to work, the sinner felt his skull was splitting up. The saw came down, sinking inch by inch until it reached his chest. He then felt the blade working downward in a curve around his heart, and it caused him even greater pain. Soon his body was split into 2. When the planks were removed, the 2 portions of the body fell apart to the ground. But not all tortures were physical, and the psychological torments ranged from the shame of having one's sins revealed to everyone in the karma mirror, or the torment of simply waiting in line for your own turn at the millstone, or on the sword tree. Yet when it comes to matching up texts and paintings, it's not entirely clear how some of these tortures worked. Paintings show demons hoisting the damned onto a single sword tree, but in the earliest texts from India, there was a whole forest of sword trees, and the damned were forced to walk through that forest during a horrendous windstorm. In later Chinese and Japanese texts, the damned were forced to climb the tree, or, in a diluted state, they willingly climbed it out of lust for the beautiful woman they had seen in the topmost branches. The superheated copper pillar, or flue, is another of the magistrate's favorite tortures, applied to quack doctors, swindlers, and adulterers alike. But again, how was it used? Some texts tell us the damned were physically bound to the pillar. Others say that they were forced to climb it to evade being beaten. Still others explain that the dead, again in a diluted state, willingly embraced the pillar as if it were their adulterous lover, burned up in passionate lovemaking. And just as the sin being punished this way or that wasn't fixed, the copper flue's location was variable too. It could be in any of the 10 hells. Furthermore, there doesn't seem to be a concern for systematic gradations in torture severity. Crimes of murder and of gossip received equally heinous retribution. So, finding a tidy and predictable system amidst these hundreds of tortures seems impossible. Yet perhaps there's not a system at work here, but rather an aesthetic. The hell spectacle appeals to sensation more than it does to the intellect. What system could there be? The multitudinous tortures were not tied to certain sins, not located in specific hells, not even used in particular ways. Instead, this confusion of torment might have evoked the sensation of comprehensive domination, of covering every contingent, until the living simply gave up trying to mentally master a knowable system. The pandemonium of tortures implicitly mastered them. Hell being hell, it was already beyond mundane experience, and perhaps the ambiguities about its tortures made them even more frightening. People are more afraid of the dark and the uncertain. And while these ambiguities were probably not intended by the writers and painters of hell, they may have inadvertently reinforced hell's message. You can't rationalize the overwhelming comprehensive diversity of hell. You instead must surrender to a system you can't fully know. Just as one day you must surrender to the magistrate's summons to the infernal tribunal itself.